Welcome to another deep dive, everybody. Today, we're going where few dare to tread. Well, at least in the realm of, controversial topics. We're diving headfirst into the world of moon landing conspiracy theories.
Ooh, exciting.
I know, right? Our listener wants to know, why do people believe we faked this monumental event? So we're going to break it all down, the arguments, evidence, the whole shebang, and our main source.
Let me guess. Wikipedia.
You got it. We're using excerpts from their article on moon landing conspiracy theories. It's pretty comprehensive, covers a lot of ground.
Yeah, Wikipedia is great for that. Big picture stuff.
Ah.
So are we talking like recent theories or way back when?
Well, what's fascinating is these theories, they kind of popped up almost right after Neil Armstrong took that giant leap for mankind.
Seriously.
So soon. It's crazy, right? We barely had time to celebrate before the skeptics came out swinging. So the question is, did this skepticism, was it already there simmering under the surface, or did something ignite it?
Good question. Well, there's this book published in 1976 called We Never Went to the Moon, America's $30 billion Swindle. The author, Bill Casing.
Okay, so a book, this is ground zero for all this. Tell me about this Casing guy. Was he a rocket scientist, someone with the inside scoop on NASA?
Not exactly. He was a technical writer, worked for Rocketdyne.
Wait, the company that built the Saturn V engines?
That's the one. But get this, his background wasn't even in engineering.
Whoa, seriously?
Yeah, English major, actually.
So not a space expert, but his book still kind of became the Bible for these theories.
Pretty much. And then things got even wilder in 1980. The Flat Earth Society, they jumped on the bandwagon, used Casing's book to back up their own claim.
Wait, hold on. The Flat Earth Society, you're telling me not only did we not go to the moon, but the Earth is also flat, according to them?
You got it. They claim NASA staged the whole thing, like a massive Hollywood production.
Okay, now that's just, wow. Who directed it? Spielberg.
Even better. They said Walt Disney paid for it and Stanley Kubrick directed it.
Talk about a conspiracy theory. Okay, so we've got the origin story, but why? Why go through all that trouble to fake it? What were the supposed motives?
All right, so buckle up. There are a few. One of the biggest, it all circles back to the space race, landing on the moon. Huge win for the U.S. during the Cold War. Totally outshined the Soviets.
Yeah, the ultimate cosmic one-upmanship. But wouldn't the Soviets have been all over that if it was fake? I mean, they were pretty invested in this whole space thing, too.
You'd think. They had their own space program. Their scientists tracked every move NASA made. Busting a hoax like that, pure propaganda gold.
Yeah, they weren't exactly shy about calling out America's shortcomings back then. So if even the Soviets accepted the moon landing as legit, what other reasons do these conspiracy folks give?
Well, some say NASA faked it to keep the cash flowing. Secure funding, avoid the whole failure thing, embarrassment, all that.
So basically, NASA was bribing everyone to stay quiet. That's a pretty hefty accusation. What did Casing say about this?
His argument. $30 billion, plenty to pay off anyone who knew the truth.
But didn't NASA go through the ringer after the Apollo 1 fire? That was a huge setback.
Yeah, that's true. Apollo 1 showed they weren't invincible. It's hard to imagine them pulling off a massive cover-up with the world watching.
Okay, so we've got the space race angle, the money angle, anything else?
Oh, there's one more. Some say it was all a distraction, a big, shiny distraction from the Vietnam War. The timing, last moon landing, right around when the U.S. pulled out of Vietnam.
The classic look over there trick, huh?
Exactly. But if you dig a little deeper, the argument falls apart. The Apollo program wasn't shut down overnight. It was budget cuts that did it. And there were even plans for space stations and Mars missions that never happened.
So not a sudden shift, more like a slow fade out, money problem.
Exactly. The timing might seem convenient, but the history tells a different story.
Okay, so we've got some possible motives. But what about the evidence? What do these moon landing skeptics actually point to?
Oh, this is where it gets juicy. Photographic weirdness, impossible environmental conditions, whispers of missing data. We're going full-on Mythbusters here. Ready for it?
Bring it on! Let's fire up those engines and see if this conspiracy can hold up under scrutiny.
Let's kick things off with a classic. The whole missing stars thing. Conspiracy theorists always ask, if they were really on the moon, where are all the stars?
Yeah, it does seem kind of weird, right? Even in a city, you can usually spot a few, so why wouldn't they be visible in the moon landing photos?
Okay, so this is where understanding photography comes in. The moon landings. They all happen during lunar daytime, The sun's blasting the surface way brighter than those distant stars. It's like trying to see stars from Times Square.
Yeah.
They're there but totally washed out.
Yeah, that makes sense. But still, wouldn't even the brightest stars show up just a little? How can we be sure they didn't, like, edit the photos to hide something?
Well, think about the astronauts' eyes. They were adjusted to all that bright sunlight. And those cameras, they were focused on the astronauts and the lunar module. Those are the main subjects, brightly lit by the sun.
So it's more about, like, camera settings than some big conspiracy.
Exactly. Plus, there's more. Pictures taken in the shadow of the lunar module, those did capture stars. Apollo 15 even got a shot of Venus from the moon's surface.
Oh, wow. So the stars were there, just not always visible. Okay, that clears that up. But what about those crosshairs in some photos? The ones that sometimes appear behind objects? That's got to be proof of tampering, right?
This is a perfect example of how a simple explanation gets turned into a conspiracy. Those crosshairs, they were etched onto a glass plate right in front of the film, like physically impossible for anything to appear in front of them. What you see in some copies, that behind the object thing, it's from overexposure during copying, not some sneaky editing.
So it's an artifact from making copies, not evidence of fakery.
Got it. But hold on, sometimes the crosshairs are like rotated or off-center a bit. What's up with that? Well, they often cropped or rotated the photos for publications, to fit a page or make them look better. Standard photo editing stuff, nothing shady going on.
Okay, so far so good. But what about the waving flag? That iconic image of the American flag? There's no wind on the moon, so how's that possible?
The waving flag. It's the conspiracy theorist's favorite. But the explanation is pretty straightforward. That flag, it was mounted on a telescopic pole to keep it extended. The waving motion, that's just it settling into place after being unfurled. Remember, in space, things keep moving because there's no air resistance to slow them down.
So like a pendulum just keeps swinging.
Yeah. And if you watch the footage, once the astronauts let go, the flag stays still. No mysterious lunar breezes involved.
All right, I'm starting to see how these things can be explained. But what about the environment on the moon? All that radiation, extreme temperatures, could they really survive that?
Now, that's a valid concern. Let's start with the Van Allen radiation belts. These are zones of intense radiation surrounding Earth, and conspiracy theorists claim they would be deadly for anyone passing through.
Yikes, that sounds scary. So how did the Apollo astronauts make it through?
The Apollo spacecraft, it zipped through those belts pretty quickly, and they had aluminum hulls for protection. Like, think of that lead apron you get at the dentist, shielding you from X-rays.
Ah, the spacecraft was their shield.
Exactly. And get this, James Van Allen, the guy who discovered these radiation belts, he actually debunked the conspiracy theories himself. Said the radiation levels weren't a serious threat to the Apollo missions.
Well, if the guy who discovered it says it's fine, I'm inclined to believe him. But what about the heat? Isn't the moon super hot? Some people claim it would melted the film in the cameras.
You got to remember, heat works differently on the moon. No atmosphere to trap it, so it's not like Earth. The Apollo landings, they were timed to occur shortly after lunar sunrise, before things got too scorching. And NASA used special coatings on their equipment, reflected heat, kept things cool.
Smart. So they took precautions to keep everything from overheating. What about the landing itself, though? Some say there should be a huge blast crater under the lunar module, but there isn't. That's got to be proof it never landed.
Right, it seems kind of weird that a 17-ton spacecraft wouldn't leave a mark.
Yeah, I'd expect a pretty big hole.
But here's the thing. The moon's gravity is much weaker than Earth's, and the lunar module's engines were throttled way down during the final descent, just enough to counter the lander's weight, not blasting the surface with full force.
So it's not like landing on sand. The lunar surface is more solid.
Exactly. More compact. And plus, that engine wasn't firing at full power. It was a controlled landing. Now, there's another engine-related claim that comes up a lot. Conspiracy theorists point out there's no visible flame during the ascent from the moon.
Yeah, you'd expect a fiery blast-off, like we see on Earth.
Right. But turns out the fuel they used in the lunar module, it produces a near-invisible exhaust. Not as dramatic, but perfectly normal in space.
So, no need for Hollywood special effects there. But even if all these visual and mechanical things check out, what about the missing data? Haven't we lost tapes and blueprints? That's got to be suspicious, right?
The missing data, that's one of the most intriguing parts of this whole debate. And yeah, there's some crucial things missing. The original Apollo 11 telemetry tapes. The ones with the raw footage of the moonwalk. Gone.
Seriously? Those tapes are missing. It's like losing the original recording of I don't know, the first Super Bowl.
It's a mystery that's fueled a ton of conspiracy theories. NASA says they were probably erased and reused, which was pretty common back then. Of course, that just makes it even more mysterious, right?
It does, but it's not just tapes, is it?
Nope. Blueprints for some of the equipment, specifically the lunar modules, they vanished too.
Now that does seem kind of fishy. How can important blueprints just disappear like that?
Yeah, it's definitely weird. But remember, back then, things weren't as organized and preserved as they are today. Luckily, we do have microfilm copies of the Saturn V blueprints, so it's not like we're totally in the dark.
Phew, that's good to know. But even with some missing data, it seems like a conspiracy this big, with so many people involved, someone would have spoken up by now, right?
That's a great point. We're talking hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of people. Astronauts, scientists, engineers, technicians, contractors. Think about it. Wouldn't someone have spilled the beans by now?
You would think. Whistleblowers have exposed all sorts of things. It's hard to believe a secret this big could stay hidden for over 50 years.
Exactly. And there's something else. If NASA could fake the moon landing, wouldn't they have made the fake evidence perfect? Why leave all these mistakes for conspiracy theorists to find?
Huh, you're right. It's almost like they wanted people to be suspicious.
Maybe they didn't realize how much people would believe in conspiracies. Or maybe they just couldn't predict every little detail that skeptics would latch onto. Whatever the reason, these flaws actually make the moon landings more believable. If it was all staged, wouldn't they have been more careful?
That makes sense. Okay, so we've tackled the photos, the environment, the missing data. What else is there to explore in this lunar landscape?
Let's step outside of NASA and look at the evidence from other sources. This is where it gets really interesting.
All right, I'm all ears. Let's hear what the rest of the world has to say about this whole moon landing business. So we've gone deep into NASA's side of things, looked at all those weird little details, but is there like any independent proof, evidence from outside NASA that backs up the moon landings?
Oh, absolutely. There's actually a ton of evidence from other sources that supports NASA's claims. A great place to start. Images of the Apollo landing sites taken by, well, other space agencies.
Oh, wow. So it's not just NASA's word against the skeptics. Other countries have actually sent their own missions to the moon.
Exactly. And their pictures, they clearly show the landers, the rovers, even the tracks left by the astronauts.
Wow. That's pretty hard to argue with. Any specific examples?
Well, we've got high-definition images from the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter, Japan's Selene Orbiter, India's Chandrayaan-1 probe, even China's Change-2 orbiter. They all show the Apollo landing sites, no question.
Whoa, that's a lot of different countries. But couldn't a really hardcore conspiracy theorist just say all those images are fake too? Like it's all one giant cover-up?
Well, they could try, but it gets harder to believe when you think about it. We're talking about independent agencies from all over the world, many of them like rivals to the U.S. during the space race. Saying they're all in on some giant conspiracy, that's a tough sell.
Yeah, what would they even gain from that? Okay, so photographing evidence from multiple sources. But what about something, more concrete? Did they bring anything back from the moon that we can actually look at?
The moon rocks. The Apollo missions brought back a ton of lunar samples, over 800 pounds, and scientists all over the world have studied them.
And what do they say? Are those rocks really from the moon, or could they be from Earth, or even, like, meteorites?
Scientists agree. The moon rocks are totally unique. Their composition, minerals, everything's different from anything we find on Earth. Plus, they match the samples brought back by the Soviet Union's Luna missions, which were uncrewed.
So even during the Cold War, both sides' evidence pointed to the moon. That's kind of cool how science brings people together, even when politics divides them.
It really is. And it just adds more weight to the moon landings being real. Multiple countries, different motivations, all looking at the same rocks, same conclusion.
Okay, so we've got the pictures, we've got the rocks. Anything else that backs up the moon landings?
Remember those retro reflectors we talked about earlier? The ones used to bounce laser beams off the moon?
Oh yeah, that sounds super sci-fi.
It does, but it's real science. Those reflectors are still sitting on the moon, left there by Apollo and Soviet rovers. Scientists use them to measure the distance to the moon, really precisely.
So it's like using lasers as a giant ruler, and since we can bounce those lasers off those reflectors, it proves they're actually there.
Exactly. It's a pretty ingenious way to confirm those missions really happen.
It is. Super clever. So after looking at all this evidence, from NASA's stuff to what other countries have found, it seems like the moon landings hold up pretty well.
They really do. It's good to be skeptical, to question things, but it's important to separate that healthy skepticism from, just believing things without evidence.
Yeah.
and the evidence overwhelmingly supports the moon landings. It's a huge achievement for humanity, shows what we can do when we work together.
It's mind-blowing to think about what those astronauts did. Leaving our planet, walking on another world, it's incredible.
It really is. And it's not just about the science and technology. There's something deeper there. It shows that we humans can accomplish amazing things when we set our minds to it.
Well said. And that wraps up our deep dive into moon landing conspiracy theories. It's been a wild ride, going through the claims, looking at the evidence, and hopefully understanding this event a little better.
Absolutely. It's been great exploring this with you. And remember, keep that critical thinking going. Don't be afraid to question things, but also take time to appreciate the incredible things humans have achieved. Who knows, maybe one day we'll all get to experience space travel for ourselves.
That would be amazing. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, everyone.